The moment I saw my husband's fingers hover above my soup bowl, my heartbeat slowed instead of racing. At the family dinner, surrounded by crystal glasses and soft violin music drifting from the speaker in the corner, I watched him drop something small into my food. Not accidentally, deliberately. A pale tablet dissolved beneath the steam before anyone else noticed. My mother-in-law kept talking about charity events, her diamond bracelet clinking against her wine glass. My sister-in-law laughed too loudly at something unfunny, and Daniel, my husband of 11 years, didn't even look at me afterward. That hurt more than the pill. Not fear, not panic. The certainty. The quiet certainty that he believed I was too blind to notice. I lowered my spoon slowly, pretending to listen while my pulse thudded in my ears like distant drums. The smell of rosemary and butter suddenly turned metallic in my nose. My fingertips went cold beneath the tablecloth. Then I remembered the conversation I'd overheard 2 nights earlier. "She's getting suspicious," his mother had whispered. Daniel's answer had been calm. "Then it has to happen soon." At the time, I convinced myself I misunderstood. Wives do that sometimes. We soften sharp truths until they become survivable. But now, staring at the cloudy swirl dissolving inside my soup, denial finally died. And strangely, so did my fear. Because betrayal changes shape once you fully see it. It becomes clean, precise, almost peaceful. I lifted my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth while everyone focused on my father-in-law, telling another exhausting story about his golf partner. Chairs scraped softly. Silverware chimed. No one watched me, so I switched the bowls. One smooth movement. Silent. My mother-in-law's bowl slid in front of me. Mine settled before her. Daniel never noticed. That was the most terrifying part. 14 minutes later, she collapsed mid-sentence. I met Daniel when I was 26, and still believed quiet. Love was the strongest kind. He admired how calm I was, how I never raised my voice, how I could smooth tension out of a room with a single smile. What I didn't understand then was that some people don't admire softness. They exploit it. By the 3rd year of our marriage, I had become useful instead of cherished. I managed his schedule, remembered his mother's medications, hosted every holiday dinner, and quietly repaired every emotional mess in that family before it became visible. Daniel liked to joke that I was the glue. Everyone laughed when he said it. No. One asked whether glue ever gets tired of holding broken things together. His mother, Evelyn, treated me less like a daughter-in-law and more like unpaid staff wrapped in silk dresses. If a dinner went well, she praised Daniel. If something failed, she looked directly at me. Over time, I learned that silence kept the peace faster than dignity ever could, and Daniel noticed that. He learned I would apologize first, bend first, forgive first. The frightening thing about being underestimated is that people stop hiding themselves around you. They become careless, honest. That's why, months before the dinner, I noticed the small changes. The locked phone, the private calls, the life insurance policy he suddenly insisted we update. The months leading up to that dinner felt like living inside a beautifully decorated room with a gas leak, nothing obvious, yet everything quietly poisonous. Daniel stopped touching me first. Not dramatically, just small absences that accumulated over time. His hand no longer rested on my back in public. He answered my questions half a second too late, like his attention lived somewhere else now. At night, the blue glow of his phone illuminated his face long after he thought I was asleep, and his mother watched all of it with unsettling calm. Evelyn had perfected the art of humiliation disguised as elegance. At lunches with her friends, she introduced me as Daniel's wife instead of using my name. When I spoke, she would pause before responding, as if translating something mildly unimportant. One evening, while pouring tea, she glanced at my empty wrist. "No bracelet?" she asked softly. I suppose not everyone keeps sentimental gifts forever. Daniel didn't defend me. He stirred his coffee and smiled into the cup. That silence lingered longer than the insult itself. Then came the financial meetings I wasn't included in. Family discussions that stopped when I entered rooms. Papers folded too quickly. Conversations interrupted mid-sentence. Once I walked into Daniel's office and heard Evelyn whisper, "After this is done, everything settles." Daniel noticed me standing there. For one brief second, genuine panic crossed his face. Then it vanished behind a practiced smile. And somehow, that frightened me more. When Evelyn collapsed onto the white tablecloth, the room did not explode into chaos immediately. For a few seconds, everyone simply stared. Her wine glass tipped first, red liquid spilling across the table like a slow-moving wound. Then came the sound of her body hitting the floor, a heavy, graceless sound I still hear sometimes in my sleep. Daniel moved before anyone else. "Mom?" Not call an ambulance, not what happened. Just that single word sharp with terror. And in that moment I knew, because innocent people react to danger differently than guilty ones. They search for answers. Daniel searched for consequences. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Someone cried. My sister-in-law kept repeating that Evelyn had been perfectly fine an hour earlier. Through it all, Daniel barely looked at me. He looked at the soup bowl. Over and over, I sat quietly beside the shattered remains of dinner, my hands folded in my lap, finally seeing my marriage without excuses wrapped around it. The manipulation, the careful isolation, the insurance paperwork, the rehearsed kindness whenever witnesses were present. It all aligned with horrifying clarity. And the strangest part was this. I didn't feel victorious. I felt awake. Later that night, while Daniel showered at the hospital, his phone vibrated beside me. A message illuminated the screen. Did she eat it? No name attached. No confusion possible. I stared at those 4 words for a long time before locking the phone again. That was the exact moment I stopped being afraid of losing my marriage, because I finally understood there had never been a marriage left to save. By the time Evelyn stabilized in the hospital, I had already begun preparing my exit. Quietly, carefully. The advantage of being underestimated for years is that people stop, imagining you're capable of strategy. Daniel thought my silence meant weakness. In reality, silence had simply taught me how to observe before moving. I worked as a financial compliance analyst before marriage, back when my days were filled with contracts, transaction trails, and risk investigations. Details stayed with me. Patterns revealed themselves quickly once I started looking honestly, and Daniel had left patterns everywhere. While he spent his days performing the role of devastated son, I copied documents from the home office one file at a time. Insurance revisions, property transfers, private investment accounts opened without my knowledge. There was even a draft agreement that shifted nearly all marital assets into a family-controlled trust after my unexpected passing. The language was polished, professional, which somehow made it colder. I forwarded everything to a private cloud account he didn't know existed, then contacted an attorney recommended by an old colleague from my finance days. I chose someone discreet, older, impossible to intimidate. No dramatic confrontations followed. I cooked dinner, visited the hospital, held Daniel's hand when nurses walked by, and every night after he fell asleep, I built the case that would quietly dismantle his entire life, piece by piece, without raising my voice once. 3 weeks later, Daniel walked into what he believed was a routine meeting with our estate attorney. He arrived polished as always, tailored charcoal suit, controlled smile, grief worn like an expensive accessory. Evelyn sat beside him, pale but recovering, her sharp eyes colder than ever. Neither of them knew. I had requested the meeting myself. The conference room overlooked the city skyline through sheets of gray. Rain, quiet, sterile, perfect for endings. Daniel barely acknowledged me when he sat down. Then my attorney placed the documents on the table. One folder for the insurance policy changes, one for the concealed accounts, one containing the toxicology report confirming sedatives in the soup. Watched Daniel's expression carefully as realization arrived, not suddenly but in stages. First confusion, then calculation, then fear. Real fear. Evelyn reached for his arm. Daniel. But he pulled away without looking at her. My attorney spoke calmly, outlining fraud investigations, attempted criminal conspiracy, and the financial evidence already secured with multiple agencies if anything happened. To me, moving forward, no threats were needed. The evidence itself became the punishment. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel looked small. Not angry, small. And when he finally raised his eyes toward me, expecting tears or rage or some final emotional performance, I simply slid my wedding ring onto the table between us. The sound it made against the wood was almost delicate. I spent 11 years protecting this family, I said quietly. You mistook that for blindness. Then I stood, picked up my coat, and walked out while the storm swallowed the windows behind me. The fallout spread slowly, which made it far more devastating. Daniel's company placed him on administrative leave within days of the investigation, becoming known internally. In finance, reputation fractures faster than glass. People who once praised his discipline suddenly stopped returning calls. Invitations disappeared. Partnerships dissolved quietly, behind polite emails and carefully worded statements. Evelyn tried controlling the narrative at first. A misunderstanding, a malicious accusation, stress-related confusion. But fear changes people, especially wealthy people with something to lose. Extended family members who once treated me like furniture began reaching out privately, asking hesitant questions they should have asked years earlier, not because they suddenly loved me, because they finally realized I had survived something real. The strangest consequence wasn't public scandal. It was silence. The kind that settles after manipulation ends. No tense monitoring of moods. No rehearsing apologies in my head before entering a room. No shrinking myself to keep peace intact. I hadn't noticed how small I'd become until I no longer had to fold inward. And that's why stories like this matter. Not because revenge is glamorous. It isn't. Most betrayal happens quietly. In marriages, families, friendships where one person slowly learns their kindness is being used against them. People stay because they doubt themselves longer than they should. I did too, until the night I realized surviving someone's betrayal sometimes requires letting them finally face themselves, without your protection standing in front of them. 6 months after I left Daniel, I rented a small apartment overlooking the river on the quieter side of the city. Nothing about it was extravagant. That was the point. For the first time in years, every object around me belonged only to my own life. The mornings were silent, except for the kettle warming on the stove and distant traffic. Below my window, I learned how peaceful ordinary things could feel when they were no longer performed for someone else's approval. People often imagine revenge as a moment of triumph, but real satisfaction arrived later, in smaller ways. Sleeping through the night without anxiety twisting in my chest. Laughing without measuring the room first. Realizing I no longer apologized for existing. The legal investigations continued quietly in the background. Daniel accepted a settlement agreement that ended our marriage, protected my assets, and ensured he stayed very far from my future. Evelyn never contacted me again, and eventually I stopped replaying the dinner in my mind. Because healing begins the moment survival is no longer your full-time occupation. Sometimes I still think about how easily that night could have ended differently, how close I came to disappearing, inside a story everyone else would have rewritten for me afterward. But they underestimated one thing: I was paying attention. And in the end, that saved my life.